Hey, everybody. We're going to talk about the Plymouth Colony today. This is the Pilgrims. You know the story a little bit. We're going to get into it just a little bit more. So, as an introduction, some of the vocabulary we're going to be studying today is the word separatists. I'm sure you can hear the word separate in there. And Pilgrims, the Mayflower Compact. A compact is an agreement, and Squanto. He is the name of a Native American helper, just like Manteo or Pocahontas. Okay, so why did the Pilgrims start a colony in North America? We're going to be thinking about that. And how did the Native Americans help them survive? So let's think about who was here. The Spanish are here for gold, God, glory, and ground. Claim land, you know that. The French are here for the French fur trade. The Dutch are here. They're also doing a little fur trading. And the British are in Jamestown, purely focused on tobacco. And of course, the Pilgrims are British as well, but they do not come looking for riches. So we'll get into that. So the story continues. That's the review I just did with you. Who were these people? They're called separatists because they wanted to separate from the Church of England, which was the official church in England at the time. And in the 17th century, which was the 1600s, a group of English citizens wanted to separate from the Church of England. They didn't believe it was the true Christian faith. So, and actually, the government of England made it a crime. You actually legally had to belong to the Church of England, which is one of the reasons our country has religious freedom today. We did not like that back then. And so, if you were trying to separate from the Church of England, you could be put in jail, you could be given a fine, and you could sometimes even be killed by the English throne. So, many separatists decided to leave England. And what they did was they went to where the Dutch lived. The Dutch were so kind and so open and accepting of different faiths. And so these British people sailed to the Netherlands, which is actually a little bit southeast of them. And they went to live in a city called Leiden. The Dutch allowed them to practice their faith however they wanted to do that. But over time, and they were actually very happy there, the British were. But over time, the English worried because their children were, of course, around Dutch children, and everyone was eating Dutch food, listening to Dutch music, all of the Dutch aspects of culture. And this is actually the city of Leiden, a drawing of it. The British parents worried that their children were losing their English culture. The children wanted to wear the wooden Dutch shoes. They wanted to speak Dutch. They wanted to eat Dutch food. And the parents became concerned. And so they said, we want to maintain our British culture. We just want to practice our religion freely. And so they decided to go back to England, get on a ship called the Mayflower, and sail to the New World. And so they decide to sail to the New World. They were not in search of gold. They were not looking for fur. They just wanted to practice their religion. So they sailed on a Mayflower. You might be thinking, why would the English crown allow them to come to the New World if they weren't going to be in the Church of England? Because they were greedy and they were grateful that families wanted to come and settle the land here in America. Because if British people were living on the land here, they could keep it secure. Fight the Spanish, fight the English, fight the Native Americans to keep the land secure. So the British Crown was very happy to agree to that. So they came in 1620. This is 1 year after tobacco's going crazy in Virginia, doing great. And it's about 13 years after the Jamestown colony first began. So that's where we are. It took them about 2 months to get overseas, and they learned. You know how Jamestown learned from Roanoke how to be successful, and they tried to have a government, and nobody left, all that. Plymouth will succeed much faster. They're going to have a difficult first winter. That first winter, half the colonists will die. they'll freeze to death. But after that first winter, they're smooth sailing, good to go. And before they even get off their ship, they decide to establish a group of rules. And they're not going to put 13 people in charge of the colony. They're going to elect one person. And they're all going to have a set of common rules that they agree to follow. Already, this is an improvement from Jamestown, right? That's why they're going to succeed a lot faster. They're going to die because they picked a bad time to arrive. They arrive at the start of winter. So there's no time to build. It's difficult to build. They can't plant food. It's a hard time to arrive. And that's why many of them die. But here we go. 41 men, of course, men, sign the Mayflower Compact. Women were not allowed to sign it, even though women and children were on the Mayflower. So this is a little bit of it. It just agrees that we'll follow all the rules to make Plymouth a successful colony. And everyone signs it. They all agree. So here's sort of a picture of what it might have looked like with them signing the Mayflower. It's called the Mayflower Compact. And they wrote it on the Mayflower ship, and a compact is an agreement. So it's the ship's agreement of them following the rules. This is where they landed here out on, remember, a claw-shaped piece of land is called a cape. This is called Cape. This is Massachusetts today. They call this Cape Cod today because it is a cape. It's a landform called a cape. And there were so many codfish there that became a good name for it. So the first place they landed was here in the Cape. It kind of tucked around right in there. The women and children stayed on the ship through the winter, and the men would come back and forth in little boats across this bay, and they would begin building the homes. And this is, again, a copy of the real Mayflower Compact. So they would begin building the homes, and then they'd come back to the ship and sleep at night, and go back again and build the homes, and come back and sleep in the ship. Okay? So that's kind of how it went. You can sort of see today, this is Rhode Island, this is Massachusetts. All right, so we're farther north from Jamestown. All right, so if you were just stepping off the Mayflower, what would you be worried about in surviving in a new land? You can pause and think about that. So they built their settlement on the site of a Native American village that had been abandoned because other Europeans had come through there. And you guys, 100% of the natives had died because of European diseases. So when the pilgrims came ashore, they saw a bunch of skeletons and abandoned village because everyone had died. So they didn't have time to build adequate. They landed at the wrong time. So they didn't have time to build adequate shelter or plant food. Nearly half of them died that first winter, but they believed God wanted them to stay there. So they stayed. But in the spring, this is when things get good. So the Mayflower, the Pilgrims only had one difficult winter, and then things turn good for them. They meet a native named Somerset. He had learned English from other explorers that had come through. Somerset introduced the Pilgrims to Massasoit. He was the chief of the Wampanoag tribe. Can you say that word, Wampanoag? Yeah, that's the natives who lived in that area, just like the Powhatans live down in Virginia. The Wampanoags live in this area. They're a different tribe altogether. Squanto is a member of the Wampanoag tribe, and he is sort of the Manteos, sort of the Pocahontas, who helps the Pilgrims settle into their new land. He brought the Pilgrims seeds from native plants, corn, pumpkins, and beans, and showed them how to plant them. And they actually, the soil, I know you remember in New England, the soil is bad up there, and it's very thin and sandy. It doesn't have a lot and rocky. It doesn't have a lot of nutrients in it. And so he teaches them how to put, and you may have learned this in fourth grade, how to put their seeds in the soil and then a dead fish on top of the seeds and then more soil. So the minerals and nutrients from the fish go into the soil and help the plants grow. It's a great system. So Squanto was just as big of help to the Pilgrims as Manteo was at Roanoke and Pocahontas was at Jamestown. And then in the fall, the Pilgrims had a wonderful harvest. They thought God had given them that harvest, and they set aside a day of thanks. Today we call it Thanksgiving. This is a picture of Thanksgiving. You would all recognize it as that. Of course, cameras didn't exist, so they were just painting this. This isn't really what it looked like. So there are some myths about Thanksgiving. What did the pilgrims eat? We know from primary sources, and you're going to be looking at those next week. We know from primary sources, people who were really there, who wrote in their journals, or they wrote letters home to their relatives. They did not eat corn on the cob. They didn't eat apples and pears and potatoes. We don't even think they had cranberries. The only food we know for sure they had was deer. And they didn't even eat it with a fork. They didn't have forks, so they just ate it with their hands. And they did not dress like this in black. They didn't wear those buckles or those weird shoes or hats. They probably wore plain brown clothes. The women probably wore plain brown dresses. There wasn't a lot of fancy clothes back then. There weren't a lot of fancy clothes. So, what do we know for sure? From the primary source, we know that the first Thanksgiving was in 1621. They arrived in December 1620, so this would have been the fall of 1621. It lasted for 3 days. It probably occurred between September 21st and November 11th sometime. We're not sure. There were about 90 Wampanoag natives and 52 colonists who participated. Massasoit, the chief of the Wampanoag tribe, contributed at least 5 deer to the feast. The Pilgrims did not have cranberry sauce, potatoes, and pies. That's silly. They also communicated through Squanto. He was a member of the Patuxet tribe. He learned English from other explorers. There are only 2 surviving descriptions of the first Thanksgiving. One is in a letter colonist Edward Winslow wrote home. He mentions some of the food and the activities they did. They played games and sang songs, and remember, it lasted 3 days. His account was lost for about 100 years, but then we found it. And the leader of the colony, William Bradford, also writes that the Wampanoag chief was there. There were roughly 90 of them and 52 colonists, and it lasted for about 3 days. Okay? And then in 1863, which was 240 years later, Abraham Lincoln made Thanksgiving an annual holiday. And so that is about it. So why did they start a colony in North America? Why did the Pilgrims start a colony? You should be able to answer that question now. And how did Native Americans help the colony survive? You should be able to answer that now. If you can't, you need to rewind and watch the video again. It's not very long. And you need to know that there was peace in the Plymouth Colony for about 50 years between the natives and the colonists. A very long, peaceful time, a lot of respect there. And then the 13 colonies are going to kind of explode and just start developing. We won't have any more Roanoke's that fail. We won't have any more Jamestowns that have these terrible starving times, this awful winter. We won't have that anymore. Everyone is going to succeed pretty quickly. They'll all learn from Jamestown and Plymouth how things should be done. Okay, so I think that's it for now. Good luck, and I'll see you soon. Thanks, guys.